Things are changing in your home now. You've got a young person who is thinking about getting their driver's license, or maybe they've already gotten their driver's license, and there's a new era of freedom. There's a new sense of, Mom and Dad, why are you telling me what to do? I'm an adult now. And yet the dilemma is they don't have full responsibility yet. You know, when you first bring a child in your home, you have 100% responsibility, and you also have 100% authority. You lay that little baby down in their crib, and they don't decide what they are going to eat that day. They don't decide what they're going to wear. They don't even decide what toy they're going to play with, because it's the toy that you've placed in their crib. But then that authority responsibility balance begins to change. They get a little older and they wander around the room, and they do choose which toy they're going to play with that day. And they begin to express opinions about what shirt or what pair of pants that they want to wear. And that's a real struggle as your child is growing up, is to know where that balance is. Here basically is what the Bible says about that. It says that it ought to match the authority and the responsibility. That the more authority that a child has, the more responsibility that they ought to have. Now the dilemma is that as a parent, you're always pushing your child to have more responsibility, to pick up their own toys and to begin to make their own bed and some of those other responsibilities. But many times we hesitate to give them authority. On the other hand, the dilemma for your child is they want all the authority, but they don't always want all the responsibility. Now, at this particular time in your child's life, you're getting to the point where you're preparing to let go completely. You're preparing to give them all of the authority, but also to give them all the responsibility. And as a result, there's a tendency for there to be some tension that is there. I think it's helpful to have a kind of celebration, a kind of anticipation for that time where that passing of the baton will take place. To say, acknowledge that it's not quite there yet, and there are some things that you're still responsible for, and therefore you still have the right to have some authority over them, but that you recognize that it is coming. And I think that will be an encouragement to them. More than an encouragement, it will help them prepare for that time where that balance of authority and responsibility takes place completely.
Well, Rite of Passage for me, what my family did, is my dad invited men from both, Colorado, Texas, all the places that I've lived that have been a huge influence in my life and have really formed who I am as a man and kind of have been that influence of what a godly man's supposed to be. Invited them all down here, and we just had a day where it was just kind of, it started out just a lot of fun. We went to go eat breakfast at one of my favorite restaurants, Chiloso here. And then we took us all and we went to the park and just hung out, threw Frisbee around, played a couple rounds of Frisbee golf, just had some fun, hanging out with each other as men and just having that fellowship, which is a huge part of it. And then later that day, we just came back to my house and had sort of unofficial, a ceremony. We had a couple friends here, but it wasn't a huge deal. It was really just came back, sat me down, and each of the men that were in my life, a couple of my uncles, some friends of ours, came to me and gave me a letter and something that represented what they wanted me to learn from that. And they just gave me, it's like what a man needs to be on each different topic. What it means to be a man in his marriage, what it means to a man to be a father, what it means to be a husband, and what it means in your job and your daily life, just all the different things, what it means to be a man of God in those different places in our life. And they would just give me these letters, read them to me, and I've still got the copies. For example, my Uncle Greg wrote me one on what it means to, I've always admired just his marriage and how he was able to be just so faithful and so loving to his wife. And he just wrote me a letter, Dear Sean, when God blesses you with a wife, his calling is for you to lead and to love. Neither is an easy task. When a husband will not lead spiritually, the family falters and the faith is not passed on. When a husband does not love his wife, anger, bitterness, and resentment follows. Just a piece of advice, something that I could take away that had an influence on me and an impact on me. And it was definitely a huge formative thing for me. It was a lot of fun, first of all, really cool just to see all those guys in my life. But really awesome just to see that to be a man in a godly sense, it is a mission, and these men were leading it. It wasn't just something you do passively. You needed to actively seek after it, and they really did that in everything in their lives. And it's just, especially after this first year of college, coming back and seeing, I can just tell my friends at school who they obviously didn't have that. There's just such a stark difference between men who are leading that life as a mission to be a man of God, and those who, never had that influence of a strong male influence or of anybody who's showing them what it means to be a man of God or just a man in general. And you can just see such a clear contrast between how they live their lives. And it's been really interesting, and it's been a huge blessing to me to know that I've had that in my life and just something I can pass on to my kids.
Most children, when they are growing up, they absorb the faith of their parents and they take on the faith of the parents. And when they come to a certain age, they need to find their own faith. I know that was true with me. I was raised in a home with strong Christians, mom and dad, and I kind of took on their faith. It came to a point where I needed my faith. A rite of passage is that mark, that delineating mark, where a teenager comes to the point where the faith is no longer that of their parents. It becomes their own faith. We turned Leah loose in her rite of passage to be responsible for her own spiritual disciplines. That was our purpose.
We had a special tea at her grandma's house, and all the ladies that were in her wisdom council, there were 6 of them, all the ladies that were in her wisdom council, they had special it was really a special time, with teapots and tea, little tea cakes and special confections. We even had edible flowers. And it was a special time, just me and Leah and her 6 wisdom council. And then they all took turns just giving her a little hint of what they were going to say, what their subject was that night. And then they said what she meant to them. And so it was a real time of blessing on her life in particular.
The ladies that I chose from my wisdom council were my 2 older sisters, my adopted older sister, a woman who had essentially been like an aunt to me all of my life, another lady who had, as a child, she would bring me into her home, and she didn't have any sons, and so there were me and a couple of the girls in the church kind of were her adopted daughters. One of the biggest things that sticks out to me from my rite of passage, which happened when I was 16 years old, is as I've gotten older, I still think of the women in the different roles that they were assigned to talk about. My mom was more instrumental in assigning them what they were going to talk about because she knew them most. But when I think about Debbie Golden and when I think about being a mom, I think about her as a mom. And they assigned Olivia, who had a very close relationship with her spouse. All of my women did, but Olivia was assigned the role of the wife and how she affected her husband, and I think of the way that she affected him. And I think that's one of the biggest things. I had specific mentors for specific roles that I have in my life. I have examples that I look to.
At the very end, her dad, we had a special blessing at the very end on her, and then he escorted her to take her seat. There were seven seats, and 3 and 3. The ladies were sitting there as they'd come up to speak, and then they would go back. And then he took her and put her in the middle. Now she was taking her place with all the other women, and now she was her own. She was in charge of her own spiritual disciplines.
I've been invited to sit on the wisdom council of several young men, and to me, that's one of the most powerful things about the rite of passage is the men that they choose or the women that they choose, because those people have been a part of the lives of those young people, and they've earned the right to be where they are. For instance, I went to Colorado Springs to be in Kyle's rite of passage, and I went to Texas to be in Sean's rite of passage. And then when they actually had the rite of passage, one was in the basement, and there was just a collection of friends there. And one was in Texas. They were in the living room, and it was a casual setting, real casual setting, not anything formal, but it was powerful. And those men that got up to speak into the life of those young men, it was powerful. Some of them read them, some memorized them, and some were eloquent, and some were just from the heart. You wouldn't call them eloquent, but you would call them powerful. And those men spoke from their heart because they knew how important this was to that young man.
You know, Rite of Passage for us was something we started talking about years before we did it. Stephen was just a little kid, and I had a friend who is into mentoring men and mentoring young people as well. And he was telling me about a ceremony that he went to and how it was this kind of Rite of Passage. And so he described it to me, and I just thought it sounded phenomenal. And I remember saying, you know, some years from now I'm going to call you back and ask you about that and how that works. And so when Stephen got up into his teenage years, Susie and I contacted him, and he recommended a book to us, and we got the book, and Susie read through the book in detail, and we really had to make a first decision about what age to do it. And I think in the book they recommend younger than we really did it with Stephen. We decided with Stephen that we would do it at the high school age, but it's really that time where you take all the people that have kind of influenced him, and in particular men, and bring them together and give kind of an affirmation, a time of affirmation and a charge, and kind of a I see in you. Here's what I've seen in you over the years. Here's what I recognize, admire, and kind of a challenge as well at a certain point. When I called them up and I said, listen, we're going to have this ceremony for Stephen, and you may not realize it, but you've had a significant impact on him. And they were surprised. They were very glad to do it. They did a fantastic job.
Well, some of them I would say were mentors, while others were mature friends. With certain people, I felt more comfortable asking serious questions, life questions, looking for guidance for the future, talking about college, talking about relationships with whether it's just friends or maybe a girl, things like that. It really depended. Another gentleman that neither of you were very close with, but that I was a guy that led a Bible study of mine, and he just opened his home, and it was a huge blessing in my life. And he really invested time in us and money in us, and they had dinner for us every week, and there's a lot of high school students went over there, and so I became close with him, and that's another person that was invited that night, and so there was all sorts of different relationships. Some were family, some were friends, some were teachers. So there was a good variation there.
You know, when it got to be time to prepare for the ceremony, of course, the first thing we wanted is we wanted it to be a surprise. Now, I know that there are different ways to approach this, and some people approach it where it's not a surprise. The child knows that it's coming, but in our case, I like surprises, so I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to sneak up on him, and I did. And so,
do you remember what you said?
What I said about
This guy.
why we were going?
Yeah. Do you remember what you said? Remember what your story was?
You probably remember it better.
You said you were going to receive some award, and you couldn't go with him to be there for moral support, so he wanted his son to go. I had to get all dressed up, which back then was just, awful, and I had to put on, a button-up shirt and slacks. Well, so I was all bent out of shape, and I was like, okay, I'll go with you to receive your award, whatever. I was an immature punk kid, and then lo and behold, I walk in and saw everyone there.
Mostly I just sent out a letter to these people, and we did invite their wives as well. It was a dinner event, and we mostly just explained, what we were doing, and asked them if they would speak for about 5 to 10 minutes, as well as write out what they were going to say, because I wanted to keep it in a book for our son, for, just to chronicle the event and, for him to have for his memories. And so we asked them if they would affirm something in Stephen, qualities that they saw in him, maybe a story about him that they remembered. And then we asked that they would, share from their own life, valuable lessons that they had learned. What would you say to a young person who was going off to school, that type of thing. And one of the things I said is, don't be preachy. He is a teenager, It will come off better if it's more from your life experiences and sharing that way. And they did a great job. They all brought their speech written out, which we have in a book.
When I walked in, I was so confused. I was expecting this award ceremony, and I saw my youth pastor, people that that didn't necessarily even live in town, and had no clue what was going on. It took me a minute to kind of understand, or I don't even know if I really understood at first, and I don't think until after I got to reflect on the event days later, really how meaningful it was. But so we walked in and took our place at the table, and they just went one by one, and they all basically covered what they had. I guess no one really went ad lib, and everyone.
No, they pretty much did. There were
followed.
one or two that went rogue a little
Yeah,
bit.
a little bit.
Right.
That's funny. I think I might have a clue who those
Yeah,
might be.
right.
But anyways, and they just really spoke from their heart, and spoke to me as a man, not as a child. Some of them had more personal stories between them and myself, and others spoke more so from life experience. And each one was very meaningful in different ways. I got up, and it was tough. It was tough to look at all those people, and I was emotional, and I think the weight of it really kind of settled on me when I got up to address all of them, and I wasn't really sure what to say. I was very grateful. I was honored, really, that they all, because I respected them so much, each and every one of them, for different reasons, and throughout different times of my life, they had really helped me through certain things and really given me a vision for the future in certain areas of my life. And I was just so grateful, and grateful to my parents that you had set that up. And it was a big ordeal, and I was blessed. And I stood up, and I think I struggled through a couple minutes of talking to them, and then we just kind of hung out after, and one by one some of them trickled out, and it was just I think maybe 2 or 3 hours, and it was a great event. Yeah.
But one of the surprises about this whole thing to me was the impact on the people who were there. I didn't count on that at all. And I remember some of the comments and some of the emotions of people I think we just live in a day where, we move so fast, and we go through seasons of life so fast, and we tend to just look back. It's like living life looking in the rearview mirror, sort of. And to have these moments where you actually mark time and say, this has been an important season, and there's a transition here. And I'd like to say we were smart enough to understand all that. We really didn't. We just wanted to do this for our son. But I remember that everybody in that room was really moved by the entire event, by the fact this just doesn't happen very much, and how many people said, I've never seen anything like this in my life.
All the other people that were there were very impacted by it, and I think they all kind of wished, that would have been done for them. And I'm sure some of them were thinking about their own children, because some of them had younger children, and about, I want to do this for my son or daughter.
Whether you're a single mom or whatever your family configuration is, again, we read widely on this subject before we did. There's so many different ways you can do this, and it can be completely family. There are people that do these things, and it's just families, grandma, grandpa, and aunts and uncles, and it's very much a family thing. I agree with what Stephen is saying here about the number of people, and even if there was just one person there, I think all of us can remember when somebody took the time or effort and pulled us aside and said, I see this in you, I admire you, I see great potential in you, I value you as a person, especially when somebody we looked up to, an adult, that kind of thing. We all remember those things. It's not about the numbers of people that do that, but that this time is marked in somebody's life. I think however you pull that off, and wherever you pull it off, and whatever, it's not about the environment or any of that. It can be right there in your kitchen, in your home. I mean, I think it's the doing of it and making that moment special that a child's going to remember for the rest of their lives, really, and that's what we believe.